Peter I of Bourbon was the second Duke of Bourbon, from 1342 to his death. Peter was son of Louis I of Bourbon, whom he also succeeded as Grand Chamberlain of France, and Mary of Auvergne. Duke Peter is reported to have been somewhat mentally unstable, a trait of nervous breakdowns presumably hereditary that showed clearly, for example, in his daughter Joan of Bourbon, the Queen, and in her son, King Charles VI of France, as well as in Peter's only surviving son, Duke Louis II. Early career. Peter I took part in several of the early campaigns of the Hundred Years' War, which broke out in 1337. In the summer of 1339 he took part in Jean de Marigny, Bishop of Beauvaise's failed attack on Bordeaux. In autumn 1341 he took part in the John, Duke of Normandy's campaign in Brittany. He was present at the coronation of Pope Clement VI at Avignon on 19 May 1342. Summer 1342 he was together with de Raoul of Brienne, Count of Eu, given command of the covering force protecting France from attacks from the north while King Philip VI campaigned in Brittany. In August 1343 he and the Dauphin of Vienna were the French ambassadors at a peace conference at Avignon. But the negotiations were fruitless as Edward III of England declined to send any but the most junior members of the embassy, lieutenant in Languedoc. On 8 August 1345 Peter I was appointed by Philip VI as his lieutenant on the southwest march. His opponent was to be Henry, Earl of Derby, who completed disembarking his army at Bordeaux the day after Peter I's appointment. Peter I arrived to take up his lieutenancy in Languedoc in September. By then the Earl of Derby had already opened his campaign, throwing the French defences into disarray with the capture of Bergerac and the destruction of the French army present there the previous month. Bourbon set up headquarters at Angoulême and begun an extensive recruitment campaign to raise a new army, command of which fell to the Duke of Normandy. However, on 21 October the Earl of Derby won another crushing victory outside Auberoche over parts of this force. The Duke of Normandy abandoned his campaign once he heard the news. In early November he disbanded his army and left for the north. The Earl of Derby exploited the absence of a French commander in the field to lay siege to the important fortress city of La Réole. Bourbon proclaimed the arrière ban in Languedoc and the Marche provinces in an attempt to find troops to relieve the siege. However, the results were poor as many of the potential recruits were still on their way home from the army just disbanded by John of Normandy. Attempts by John I, Count of Armagnac, to raise troops from his domains in the Rouergue also produced little. Early January 1346 the garrison of La Réole marched away under truce. Winter 1346 Bourbon kept his winter quarters at the provincial capital of Agen, a city which quickly was becoming isolated as many of the lesser towns were captured or defected to the English. Spring, however, opened with the so far greatest French effort in the southwest. Bourbon and the Bishop of Beauvais raised a new army at Toulouse, in part financed by the Pope, whose nephew had been captured by Derby the previous year, while John of Normandy brought with him a substantial number of nobles from the north, including such dignitaries as the Eudes, Duke of Burgundy, Raoul II of Brienne, Count of Eu, the Constable of France, both marshals and the Master of Crossbowmen. In April Normandy laid siege to the town of Aiguillon, which controlled the confluence between the Lot and the Garonne. There they still remained in August, when John of Normandy was urgently recalled to the north to help stop Edward III, who had landed in Normandy. And so, the French 1346 campaign in the south ended, having accomplished nothing. Diplomatic missions. In July 1347 he took part in fruitless negotiations with the English outside Calais in the days just before that city's capitulation. On the 8th of February 1354 he was, together with the guide Cardinal of Boulogne, appointed as King John II's commissioners to King Charles II of Navarre, empowered to offer whatever Charles wanted. The two met the King of Navarre in the castle of Mantes, accompanied by the two dowager queens and droves of courtiers and ministers, most of whom more or less openly sympathized with Charles of Navarre. The treaty, concluded the 22nd of February, granted to Charles of Navarre a considerable part of Lower Normandy, which he was to hold with the same rights as the Duke of Normandy. In January 1355 he was sent together with the Chancellor of France Pierre de la Forêt on a diplomatic mission to Avignon, where they were to meet with an English embassy led by Henry of Lancaster and Richard Fitzalan, 10th Earl of Arundel. The purpose of the mission was to formally ratify a peace treaty, based on a draft drawn up at Guinness the previous year. However, since then French policy had changed. The French ambassadors had only come to reject the English demands and had nothing new to offer. Negotiations therefore quickly broke down, and the conference ended having accomplished nothing except prolonging the existing truce a few more months, until the 24th of June, May 1355, when it became apparent that open war was about to break out between the King of France and a King of Navarre allied to England. The Duke of Bourbon belonged to the party fronted by the dowager queens, who lobbied John II on Charles of Navarre's behalf. In the end, John II gave way, and on the 31st of May agreed to pardon Charles of Navarre. In July, the Duke of Bourbon and the Chancellor met with English ambassadors to negotiate the extension of the truce. As both the French and English governments had decided to resume the war, these negotiations were naturally quite empty and fruitless. Peter was killed in the Battle of Poitiers the 19th of September 1356 and buried in the now demolished Church of the Couvent des Jacobins in Paris. Marriage and issue. On the 25th of January 1336 he married Isabella of Valois, daughter of Charles, Count of Valois, and his third wife, Mao of Châtillon. Peter and Isabella had one son and 7 daughters. Louis II. Joanna married King Charles V of France. Blanche married King Pedro of Castile in 1353 in Valladolid, poisoned by her husband. Bonne married Amadeus VI, Count of Savoy in 1355 in Paris. Catherine married John VI of Harcourt. Margaret married Arnaud Emmanuel, Viscount of Tartus. Isabella, Prioress of Poissy. Ancestors.